It's August 2009, and the desert heat of Kuwait is shimmering at a dangerous 50 degrees Celsius as wedding preparations reach their final stages in the town of Jara, west of Kuwait City. Inside massive white ceremonial tents, designed to provide shelter from the brutal Middle Eastern sun, hundreds of women and children are celebrating what should be one of life's most joyous occasions, the marriage of a beloved family member. The festivities follow ancient Kuwaiti traditions where men and women celebrate separately, allowing the female guests to remove their head coverings and relax in the company of other women. Children run between the decorative pillars while their mothers and grandmothers share traditional foods imported from across the globe and enjoy performances that represent the height of Arabian hospitality. But lurking among these celebrating women is someone whose presence will transform this day of joy into one of the most horrific mass murders in Middle Eastern history. 23-year-old Nasra Yussef Mohammad al-Enezi moves through the crowd carrying containers of gasoline, her mind consumed by a jealous rage that will soon claim the lives of 57 innocent people. Keep this image of a wedding celebration in mind as we explore this story, because what happens in the next 3 minutes will demonstrate how quickly paradise can become hell when human jealousy reaches its most extreme and dangerous form. The investigation that follows will reveal not just a crime of passion, but a calculated act of revenge that exploited both cultural traditions and structural vulnerabilities to maximize death and suffering. Kuwait in 2009 was a small nation that punched far above its weight economically, thanks to sitting atop the world's 6th largest oil reserves. This tiny country, with a population smaller than London, had transformed itself into the 5th richest nation globally, with the Kuwaiti dinar holding the distinction of being the world's strongest currency. But wealth doesn't automatically translate to social progress or individual happiness. Kuwait remained a deeply traditional society where ancient customs coexisted with modern luxury, creating tensions that could be difficult for individuals to navigate, particularly women whose roles were still largely defined by marriage and motherhood. The country's extreme climate, with summer temperatures regularly exceeding 50 degrees Celsius, meant that social gatherings required careful planning and protective infrastructure. Wedding celebrations, which could last for days and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, relied on elaborate tent systems to provide shelter from the deadly heat. These tents were like temporary cities, capable of housing hundreds of people for extended celebrations. But their design prioritized capacity and grandeur over safety considerations, creating conditions where a single point of failure could have catastrophic consequences. In this environment of extreme wealth, traditional gender roles, and physical vulnerability to climate conditions, personal grievances could escalate into tragedies that would be impossible in other settings. Nasra Yussef Mohammad al-Enezi's story began in the traditional framework that shaped most Kuwaiti women's lives in the early 2000s. Born into a culture where women's primary roles centered around marriage and motherhood, Nasra had limited opportunities to define her own identity or pursue independent goals. When she married Syed Zara at age 19, the arrangement seemed to follow the normal pattern of Kuwaiti family formation. Syed worked outside the home to provide financial support, while Nasra managed the household and childcare responsibilities that defined women's contributions to family success. They quickly welcomed 2 children into their household, but both boys were born with special needs that required intensive care and constant attention. For many couples, this challenge would have brought them closer together as they united to support their children's development and medical needs. But instead of creating partnership and mutual support, the children's conditions became a source of stress and resentment that poisoned the marriage from within. Nasra found herself overwhelmed by caregiving responsibilities that demanded more time and energy than typical child rearing, while Syed began to view his wife and children as burdens rather than blessings. Think of their marriage like a structural engineering project, where the foundation was never properly designed to handle the weight of the challenges they would face. Instead of reinforcing their partnership when problems arose, the additional stress caused the entire system to begin cracking under pressure. Nasra's mental health, which had been fragile even before marriage, deteriorated under the combined pressures of intensive caregiving, social isolation, and her husband's growing resentment. But in Kuwaiti society of the early 2000s, mental health issues carried significant stigma, preventing her from seeking the professional help that might have addressed her psychological problems before they became dangerous. In traditional Islamic culture, polygamy represents a legitimate option for men who can financially support multiple wives and treat them equally. For Syed, who was becoming increasingly dissatisfied with his domestic situation, the prospect of taking a second wife offered an escape from the challenges of his current family circumstances. Rather than working to improve his relationship with Nasra or seeking support for their special needs children, Syed chose to pursue the option that required least effort from him personally. He began working with matchmakers to identify potential second wives, treating his marriage problems as something that could be solved through addition rather than improvement. This decision represented a fundamental betrayal of the partnership that marriage is supposed to represent. Instead of viewing Nasra as a partner facing shared challenges, Syed was essentially replacing her with someone who hadn't yet been tested by difficult circumstances. For Nasra, learning about Syed's decision to seek a second wife was devastating on multiple levels. It represented rejection of her as a person, abandonment during a period when she needed support most, and confirmation that her husband viewed their children's special needs as her personal failure rather than a shared responsibility. The psychological impact of this rejection is like discovering that your business partner has been secretly negotiating to replace you while you've been working to solve shared problems. The betrayal is compounded by the realization that your partner views your efforts as inadequate rather than valuable. The process of finding and marrying a second wife in Kuwait typically takes several months, during which the existing wife must continue living with the knowledge that she is being replaced. For Nasra, this extended period of humiliation and uncertainty created psychological conditions that transformed hurt feelings into homicidal rage. Rather than expressing her anger directly or seeking support from family and friends, Nasra internalized her resentment and began planning revenge against the husband who had rejected her and the woman who was replacing her. Her mental health problems, combined with the social isolation of her caregiving responsibilities, created a psychological echo chamber where her grievances grew and multiplied without reality checks from other perspectives. During this period, Nasra's behavior remained outwardly normal. She continued caring for her children, maintaining the household, and participating in social activities, without giving obvious signs of the violence she was contemplating. This ability to maintain a normal facade while planning mass murder suggests significant psychological sophistication and premeditation. The announcement in August 2009 that Syed had chosen his second wife and planned to marry her immediately served as the final trigger for Nasra's violent fantasies. Rather than accepting the situation or seeking alternative solutions, she decided that if she couldn't prevent the marriage, she would destroy it in the most dramatic and punishing way possible. August 2009 brought one of the most elaborate and expensive wedding celebrations in recent Kuwaiti history, as Syed's family spared no expense in demonstrating their wealth and social status. The celebration was planned to showcase traditional Kuwaiti hospitality enhanced by modern luxury, flowers imported from Holland, food prepared by international chefs, and entertainment sourced from around the world. The wedding venue in Jara followed traditional customs where male and female guests celebrated separately in different tent structures. This arrangement allowed women to relax without observing hijab requirements, while children played freely in a safe, family-oriented environment. The tent designated for women and children was enormous, designed to accommodate hundreds of guests during what was expected to be a day-long celebration. But the structure's design prioritized capacity and aesthetic appeal over safety considerations, featuring only a single entrance, exit and maze-like interior layout that would prove fatal when emergency evacuation became necessary. Nasra attended the wedding as expected, maintaining the appearance of a gracious first wife, accepting her husband's polygamous marriage. To other guests, she seemed calm and appropriate, giving no outward indication of the violence she was planning to unleash. But Nasra had spent weeks preparing for this moment, researching the tent's construction, identifying its vulnerabilities, and planning how to maximize casualties while ensuring her own escape. She had obtained gasoline and hidden it near the celebration area, waiting for the moment when the maximum number of people would be gathered in the most vulnerable location. The timing of her attack was calculated to coincide with the peak of the celebration, when guests would be most relaxed and least likely to notice signs of danger until it was too late to escape. What happened next represents one of the most horrific mass murders in Middle Eastern history, executed with a precision that reveals careful planning and complete absence of human empathy. While hundreds of women and children celebrated inside the wedding tent, Nasra began systematically dousing the tent's perimeter with gasoline. Kuwait's extreme heat and arid climate create perfect conditions for rapid fire spread, and the tent's fabric construction provided ideal fuel for an accelerated blaze. Within moments of ignition, the entire structure was engulfed in flames that reached internal temperatures of 500 degrees Celsius. The single exit design that had seemed adequate for normal use became a death trap when hundreds of panicked people tried to escape simultaneously. The narrow opening created a bottleneck effect where people became trapped against each other, preventing escape while the fire consumed everything around them. The speed of the fire's spread was catastrophic. From initial ignition to complete destruction took only 3 minutes. Emergency services had no time to respond, and even people who initially escaped the flames often suffered fatal injuries from burns or smoke inhalation. Think of this scenario like a controlled demolition where every safety system fails simultaneously. The tent's design, Kuwait's climate, the crowd density, and the single exit combined to create a perfect storm of destruction that maximized casualties while minimizing escape opportunities. When the fire finally burned itself out, the scene resembled a battlefield more than a wedding celebration. Charred remains were scattered throughout the collapsed tent structure, with many victims burned beyond recognition. The metal tent framework stood like a skeleton against the desert sky, surrounded by ash that had once been human beings celebrating love and family. The scale of the tragedy overwhelmed Kuwait's emergency response systems and medical facilities. Hospitals throughout the region were flooded with burn victims requiring intensive care, while forensic teams faced the massive task of identifying remains that had been destroyed by the extreme heat. The identification process required specialists in forensic anthropology and dental analysis, as traditional identification methods were impossible given the condition of the remains. Families waited in agony for news about their loved ones, while medical teams worked around the clock to save those who had survived with critical injuries. Over the following days, the death toll continued to rise as victims succumbed to their burns in hospital intensive care units. The final count reached 57 deaths, with 74 additional injuries, making it one of the deadliest mass murders in Kuwait's history. The victims range from elderly grandmothers to infants, all of whom had been attending what should have been a joyous family celebration. Among the dead were the bride's mother and sister, women who had been looking forward to welcoming a new family member, but instead became casualties of Nasra's jealous rage. The psychological impact on survivors and witnesses was profound, as many people had watched helplessly while family members died in front of them. The trauma extended throughout Kuwait's small, tight-knit society, where almost everyone knew someone affected by the tragedy. Initial investigators assumed the fire had been accidental, caused by electrical problems or ceremonial incense that had ignited the tent fabric. Wedding fires, while rare, were not unheard of in hot climates where temporary structures and open flames created inherent risks. But as forensic specialists examined the burn patterns and interviewed witnesses, evidence emerged that the fire had been deliberately set using accelerants that had been strategically placed to maximize destruction. The systematic nature of the gasoline distribution indicated someone with specific knowledge of the tent's layout and construction. The investigation focused initially on potential enemies of the groom's family or business rivals who might have targeted the wedding for economic or political reasons. But when no external threats could be identified, attention turned to people within the immediate family circle who had access to the venue and detailed knowledge of the celebration plans. Nasra's position as Syed's first wife made her an obvious person of interest, but investigators initially assumed that if she were involved, it would have been in a support role rather than as the primary perpetrator. The scale and sophistication of the attack seemed beyond what a single person could accomplish, particularly a woman with no apparent criminal background. When detectives brought Nasra in for routine questioning as part of their investigation into family members' whereabouts during the fire, they expected to clear her quickly and move on to other potential suspects. Instead, they found themselves confronting someone whose psychological state had completely deteriorated following her act of mass murder. Without consulting an attorney or attempting to negotiate any kind of plea arrangement, Nasra broke down and provided a detailed confession about setting the tent on fire. Her account included specific information about how she had obtained the gasoline, where she had positioned it around the tent's perimeter, and how she had ignited the blaze. The confession was delivered in a matter-of-fact tone that horrified investigators, as Nasra showed no apparent remorse for the 57 deaths she had caused. She described the murders as justified revenge against her husband for his decision to take a second wife, viewing the deaths of innocent women and children as acceptable collateral damage in her personal war. But after being advised by legal counsel about the consequences of her confession, Nasra attempted to retract her statements and claim that she had been coerced into false admissions by police pressure. This sudden reversal revealed someone who understood the legal implications of her actions but was trying to escape consequences through procedural challenges. The attempted retraction was unsuccessful, as the confession had been properly recorded and witnessed according to Kuwaiti legal standards. More importantly, physical evidence and witness testimony corroborated the details Nasra had provided, making it impossible to dismiss her admissions as false or coerced. While awaiting trial, Nasra announced that she was pregnant with her third child, a development that complicated the legal proceedings significantly. Under Kuwaiti law, pregnant women cannot be sentenced to death, as executing an expectant mother would also kill an innocent unborn child. This pregnancy claim forced prosecutors to delay the death penalty proceedings and consider alternative sentencing options. However, the timing of the announcement raised suspicions about whether the pregnancy was genuine or a calculated attempt to avoid execution. 2 months later, Nasra claimed to have miscarried, alleging that prison guards had forced her to take medication that caused the pregnancy loss. These accusations prompted additional investigations and medical examinations, but no evidence was found to support her claims about forced medication. The pregnancy situation reveals the complex intersection of traditional religious law, modern legal procedures, and Nasra's continued attempts to manipulate systems for her own benefit. Even facing multiple murder charges, she remained focused on finding angles that might reduce her culpability or consequences. Whether the pregnancy was real or fabricated, its timing and Nasra's subsequent claims about forced miscarriage suggest someone who continued to view the legal system as something to be gamed rather than a legitimate process for determining justice. When Nasra's trial began in March 2010, the proceedings attracted international attention due to the scale of the tragedy and the unusual circumstances of a woman committing mass murder in a traditional Islamic society. The courtroom was packed with family members of victims seeking justice for their lost loved ones. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of Nasra's guilt, including her original confession, witness testimony about her behaviour at the wedding, and forensic evidence about how the fire had been set. The case was strength forward in terms of establishing what had happened and who was responsible, but the defence team attempted multiple strategies to either reduce Nasra's culpability or eliminate the death penalty as a sentencing option. They argued that her youth, gender, and mental health issues should be considered mitigating factors that warranted life imprisonment rather than execution. They also presented an alternative version of events where Nasra claimed she had intended only to damage property rather than kill people, suggesting that she thought the gasoline was water and had no understanding of how dangerous her actions would be. This explanation was immediately contradicted by witness testimony from someone who had seen Nasra deliberately pouring gasoline around the tent's perimeter and igniting it with a lighter. The witness account eliminated any possibility that the fire had been accidental or that Nasra had been unaware of the consequences of her actions. Throughout the trial proceedings, Nasra's demeanour revealed someone who still didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what she had done or the certainty of severe consequences. Her lawyer's attempts to portray her as a mentally ill young woman deserving of sympathy were undermined by the calculated nature of her crime and her continued lack of genuine remorse. One of the most powerful aspects of Nasra's trial was the participation of victim family members who were given opportunities to address the court about the impact of their losses. Under Kuwaiti law, victim families have the right to request mercy for defendants, potentially allowing life imprisonment instead of execution. In cases involving less serious crimes or circumstances suggesting genuine remorse from perpetrators, families sometimes choose to exercise this mercy option as a way of demonstrating forgiveness and moving toward healing. But in Nasra's case, not a single family among the 57 victims requested anything less than the maximum penalty. The unanimous demand for her execution reflected both the scale of her crimes and the complete absence of any mitigating factors that might justify mercy. Family members testified about losing mothers, daughters, sisters, and children in a single afternoon, describing how the wedding celebration had been transformed from joy to unimaginable tragedy in just 3 minutes. Many spoke about the particular cruelty of having their loved ones killed during what should have been a happy family gathering. The testimony revealed that Nasra's attack had destroyed entire family networks, as multiple generations of women had been celebrating together when the fire consumed them. Some families lost their primary caregivers, financial supporters, and emotional anchors all in the same incident. The unanimous rejection of mercy by victim families sent a clear message to the court about the community's judgment regarding appropriate consequences for Nasra's actions. After hearing weeks of testimony and considering all possible mitigating factors, the court found Nasra guilty of 57 counts of premeditated murder and numerous counts of attempted murder for the injured survivors. The verdict reflected the court's conclusion that her actions had been deliberate, calculated, and executed with full knowledge of their likely consequences. The sentence was death by hanging, making Nasra only the second woman in Kuwaiti history to receive capital punishment. This historical rarity reflected both the exceptional nature of her crimes and the court's determination that gender could not serve as a mitigating factor when weighed against the scale of her violence. The death sentence was mandatory under Kuwaiti law for premeditated murder involving multiple victims, but the court's decision to uphold it despite defense arguments about mental illness and youth demonstrated their conclusion that Nasra's crimes warranted the ultimate penalty. Following her sentencing, Kuwait implemented new safety regulations for wedding celebrations, requiring certified installation of temporary structures and mandatory safety inspections before large gatherings could be approved. These changes represented the government's recognition that the tragedy had revealed serious gaps in public safety oversight. Nasra remained on death row for nearly 8 years while her case went through the appeals process and legal challenges were resolved. During this time, she continued to maintain her innocence despite the overwhelming evidence of her guilt, suggesting someone who had never developed the capacity for genuine accountability or remorse. On January 25, 2017, Nasra's sentence was finally carried out along with 6 other death row inmates, including 3 women and a member of Kuwait's royal family who had been convicted of murdering his disabled nephew. The executions were conducted by hanging in Kuwait's central prison. Media access to the executions was restricted, partly due to the presence of a royal family member among those being executed. This limitation meant that details about Nasra's final moments remained private, though prison officials confirmed that the sentences were carried out according to Kuwaiti legal procedures. For the families of her 57 victims, Nasra's execution provided a measure of closure and justice that had been 8 years in coming. Many family members attended vigils and memorial services on the day of her execution, viewing it as the final chapter in a tragedy that had dominated their lives since 2009. The wedding tent fire became a defining moment in Kuwait's modern history, representing the kind of tragedy that forces societies to confront uncomfortable truths about safety, mental health, and the potential for violence within traditional social structures. The case highlighted the need for better mental health services and reduce stigma around seeking psychological treatment, particularly for women dealing with isolation and stress within traditional family roles. Had Nasra received appropriate treatment for her mental health issues, the tragedy might have been prevented. The incident also sparked conversations about polygamy and women's rights within Islamic societies, as many observers noted that Nasra's crime had been motivated by her powerlessness within a legal system that allowed her husband to replace her without her consent. The safety regulations implemented after the fire represented recognition that traditional practices needed to be updated with modern safety standards, particularly when large gatherings occurred in challenging environmental conditions. Nasra's progression from unhappy wife to mass murderer reveals how untreated mental illness can interact with cultural pressures and personal grievances to create catastrophic violence. Her inability to cope with her children's special needs, combined with her husband's rejection and the social isolation of her circumstances, created psychological conditions that overwhelmed her capacity for rational decision-making. The calculated nature of her attack, researching the tent's vulnerabilities, obtaining gasoline, timing the fire for maximum casualties, demonstrates that her mental illness didn't prevent sophisticated planning, but rather channeled her intelligence toward destructive purposes. Her lack of remorse even after conviction suggests someone whose psychological development had been fundamentally damaged by her circumstances and mental health problems. The combination of a narcissistic personality traits and untreated psychological disorders created someone capable of viewing mass murder as justified revenge. The case illustrates how quickly individual grievances can escalate to mass violence when mental illness intersects with access to weapons, in this case, accelerants, and vulnerable targets in confined spaces. Nasra's 3 minutes of revenge destroyed 57 lives and forever altered Kuwait's sense of safety and social trust. Her victims included elderly women who had come to celebrate their family's joy, young mothers who left behind orphan children, and children whose lives had barely begun. The ripple effects of her crime extended far beyond the immediate casualties, affecting hundreds of family members who lost loved ones, and thousands of community members who had their sense of safety shattered by witnessing such violence at a family celebration. Nasra's own children lost not only their father's love and attention, as he withdrew from them even further after the murders, but also their mother to the criminal justice system. They will grow up knowing that their mother killed 57 people because she was angry about their father's remarriage. The wedding tent fire serves as a reminder that personal grievances, no matter how legitimate they may feel to those experiencing them, never justify violence against innocent people. Nasra's rage at her husband's betrayal was understandable, but her decision to express that rage through mass murder transformed her from victim to perpetrator of far greater crimes. The case of Nasra al-Enezi provides important lessons about identifying and preventing similar tragedies in traditional societies where women's grievances may be minimized or ignored until they explode into violence. Mental health services need to be accessible and destigmatized, particularly for women dealing with isolation, caregiving stress, and marital problems. Early intervention might have provided Nasra with coping strategies and support systems that could have prevented her psychological deterioration. Communities need to recognize that seemingly stable individuals can become dangerous when multiple stressors combine with untreated mental illness and access to weapons or vulnerable targets. The case also demonstrates the importance of safety regulations for large gatherings, particularly in challenging environmental conditions where structural failures can have catastrophic consequences. Most importantly, the tragedy serves as a reminder that traditional practices and modern safety standards must be balanced to preserve cultural heritage while protecting human life. Today, the site where the wedding tent stood has been transformed into a memorial garden where families of the victims can visit and remember their lost loved ones. The memorial includes the names of all 57 victims and serves as a reminder of how quickly celebration can turn to tragedy. The annual memorial services held on the anniversary of the fire bring together survivors and family members to honour the memory of those who died, and to renew their commitment to preventing similar tragedies through improved safety standards and mental health awareness. Nasra Yussef Mohammad al-Enezi's name has become synonymous with jealous rage and mass murder in Kuwait, serving as a cautionary tale about how personal grievances can escalate to unimaginable violence when combined with mental illness and access to deadly weapons. Her victims are remembered not for how they died, but for the lives they lived and the love they shared with families who continue to mourn their loss. The wedding celebration was meant to mark the beginning of new family bonds, but instead it became the scene of one of the most heinous crimes in Middle Eastern history, perpetrated by someone whose jealousy transformed her into a monster capable of burning alive the innocent people who had trusted her enough to celebrate alongside her.